Welcome back to the show. Today, I have with me the CEO of Breakpoint Energy, Alex Gupta. And Breakpoint Energy is a clean energy tax credit brokerage firm. Now, we have him here today to tell us all about what he does.
Nada, thank you very much for having me here today. Really excited to share what Breakpoint Energy is doing with you. So Breakpoint Energy is, as you mentioned, a tax credit brokerage firm that's based here in Houston, Texas. And what we're focused on is helping companies to buy clean energy tax credits that are available as a result of the Inflation Reduction Act. And this is a brand new industry that only became legal last year in the beginning of 2023. And there's a lot of buzz around it, but there's also a lot of uncertainty. The reason that tax credits are relevant are because of a couple of things. First of all, as you know, in the IRA, there is a lot of discussion about tax credits that lots and lots of technologies are able to benefit from. And so the manufacturers of products, the project owners who plan to build all sorts of clean energy sources must monetize these tax credits in order to earn a return and continue to do their business. So it's very critical that these tax credits are monetized. And we can talk a little bit more about it, but the big change that's happened is that previously, before the IRA came about, these tax credits were not allowed to be sold. The project owners needed to monetize themselves, and so there's a framework called tax equity, where there would be a partner of a project or a project company that would monetize the tax benefits while the developer would monetize the cash that would come from it. And there's a whole host of challenges with that. It's still a great process, but it takes a long time. And so with transferability, it just opened the floodgates for new players to be able to come and monetize these tax credits in a much faster way.
There's a challenge here because in some ways we're throwing out the tax equity structure, right? I mean, it's good for some people, not so good for others, right? Is that true?
That's a good question, Jason. So tax equity is still alive and well. Okay. And the reason for that is it's considered the gold standard in terms of monetizing these tax credits, because as we're about to talk about in this new transferability space, the tax credits are purchased at a discount to their face value. But in tax equity, they're monetized at their full value, and the tax equity partners are still able to use other tax benefits like depreciation, and that's not possible in transferability. So the takeaway is that this is a new alternative, but tax equity is still alive and well. Granted, there's some proposed regulations that tax equity providers will need to have more capital on their balance sheets, higher capital requirements in order to make tax equity investments. So that's one challenge that's heading their way. But in terms of attractiveness to a developer, it is still alive and well.
My question was maybe going back to tax equity and explaining a little bit about what that is, and then how this plays into it, what your solution.
Yeah, how historically, how does tax equity work? What is it?
Yeah.
Sure. So at a very high level, tax equity is a partnership between a developer and another institution that's able to monetize tax benefits. And the reason that a developer, I'm saying developer, I'm using as an example, a developer of let's call it a utility scale wind, solar, or battery farm. The reason that a developer would want to enter into a partnership with a tax equity provider is because they just don't have the ability to monetize tax benefits. And it's just sort of an anomaly of their business that these projects that they're working on building and developing, they bring forth a whole lot of tax credits that are magnitudes beyond what they would be able to use themselves.
And so like the real challenge is you have to be profitable to pay taxes and then therefore monetize a tax credit. And a lot of project developers, I guess, are out of the money until the project's up and running. And I assume that's the challenge. And so there's a discount on that. There's a loss where you're not fully able to realize it. And so it's easier to kind of transfer it to someone else who can take it that year. right?
You got it. That's the right way to think about it. So these tax equity partnerships take 6 months to a year to negotiate. The tax equity investors are generally very focused and careful during the diligence process because it is an equity investment. And there's a lot of time and effort that goes into negotiating the related transaction documents. With transferability, it's way faster. We're talking 2 to 3 months to get it done. It's a diligence light process because what the buyer of the tax credit is focused on is fact patterns related to making sure that the tax credits will be respected by the IRS. And what I mean by that is that there are very prescriptive rules that a developer or a manufacturer, anyone who's trying to get tax credits, must follow in order for those tax credits to actually be allowable for use by somebody.
And also what's, I think, maybe really enabling by this is you said it, you don't have to be an equity investor. Doesn't mean you have to be as involved in the business. You don't have to actually know much about what you're buying, other than as long as you follow these rules. And I guess I could be a pet store owner and could buy and engage in promoting kind of clean energy by buying these through this transferability. Like I could be completely unrelated. Is that true?
That's exactly right. And that's the beauty of this, is that these tax credits are able to be utilized by organizations from all sorts of industries. It's not renewable energy specific, as you mentioned. And the benefits of question is, well, what's the point of someone coming to the table to try to buy these tax credits? Really, they're very, very valuable benefits. One, tax credits can be used to reduce a company's taxes in a given year by up to 75%. First of all, a caveat: I'm not giving any legal advice here. Folks should consult their own lawyer. But depending on their company's specific situation, a significant amount of their tax liability in that year can be reduced by using tax credits. And which is important. Why is that important? Because if it's a publicly traded company, they might be measured internally and externally on factors like earnings per share. We know that organizations often have one of their largest expenses being taxes. So tax management is a very big focus of a lot of executives at companies. Two, these tax credits, as we talked about earlier, are being purchased at a discount. So if we're talking, there's a large project of $100 million of tax credits, just to give an example. If there are $100 million of tax credits and a buyer buys them at 92 cents on the dollar, what that means is that they will benefit from the difference. So $8 million, they would pay $92 million to the developer, receive $100 million in tax credits, and on an after-tax basis, they're benefiting by that $8 million difference. And something that's important and that I'd like people to understand is that the opportunity cost of not entering into a transaction like this is that you're paying taxes to the IRS. It's not that you're doing R&D or taking your team on a leadership tour. It is very much that you would be otherwise paying this cash in federal income taxes. So it's very attractive. And then the last big one is ESG goals. And because the purchase of these tax credits is very directly financing the development activity that we talked about. So a company is able to very easily and impactfully achieve its ESG initiatives by buying some of these tax credits.
I'm curious. So usually the benefit for the developers, they're getting cash earlier and maybe through a cheaper mechanism than, I guess, equity financing or a loan. At some point, they still have to deliver, right? So is there a warranty they have to provide to the buyer of the tax credits? I guess the question behind that is, how do you guarantee the tax credit gets cut?
Yeah,
if that makes sense.
It does, Jason. That's a great question. So what is required in all of these deals is a form of credit support from the seller. And all that means is what you just said, a way of ensuring that the seller's obligations will be backstopped and that the buyer will be made whole if something were to go wrong. And so the two ways that credit support is provided is, one, if the seller has a big, large entity as a parent that owns that company, that has a large balance sheet, meaning they have a lot of cash, a lot of equity, then they can provide a guarantee and say, hey, buyer, if something goes wrong, I'm going to make you whole. Not every developer or seller of tax credits can do that. And so what has become popular in the market is a tax insurance product. And just like how we insure our houses and our cars, you can go out and insure the validity of these tax credits. So those are the two ways. That's a good question.
Yeah. And so just kind of thinking through the math. So if there's like maybe an 8 to 10% discount on the transference, does that mean the insurance itself can only be like 1 or 2% of the cost of the transfer, right? Is that typically where we're seeing things today?
Yeah, this tax credit insurance can run about 2 to 3% of the tax credit value in general. So if a buyer is buying a tax credit at a 8% discount to face value, so they're buying it at 92 cents on the dollar, what the seller is actually going to recognize is lower than that, because this insurance you just mentioned, that might be another 2 to 3 cents more that they're going to have to pay for, because it's typically the seller who pays for that, as well as other transaction expenses, which isn't unusual for any sort of M&A or transaction deal, for it to be negotiated for the seller to cover a lot of these expenses. So in the example you just said of 92 cents on the dollar, the seller at the end of the day might be recognizing something close to maybe 86 cents on the dollar that they're taking home.
And so that's why maybe someone would want to stick with tax equity is because you're not having to discount it, but the trade-off here is you're enabling kind of the seller to find the best option for them. And that's really what this new law enables. And that's what makes it interesting, right?
That's exactly right.
So the new law allows for you to be able to transfer your credits. Why would they do that? How is that kind of beneficial to the IRS?
Well, the reason I can't speak to why the IRS chose to do it in the form of a tax credit, but what I suspect is that it's easier for the IRS to collect less money than it is for them to front more cash to somebody.
Yeah.
I would suspect that's why they did it in the form of a tax credit.
Isn't that a matter of law though? Not necessarily. Was it an IRS rule, or was it like a matter of the IRA itself?
IRA said that this concept of transferability was going to come about, and then Treasury came up with proposed regulations last year of how this would work. I call it proposed regulations because it is it could have some adjustments, but the understanding is that folks are able to very comfortably transact based on those, and they are. But it was the government who came up with the idea of it being in the form of tax credits.
Yeah, I could definitely see where the IRS is underfunded, and they go, okay, what's the easiest thing we can do today?
That's exactly right. And there was a period during the financial crisis, like 2008-ish, there was temporarily a grant that the government was giving. So it was what you were just asking about. It was cash that they were actually giving, but that was limited, and because there weren't a lot of tax equity players at the time. But that was only offered for a limited amount of time, and now we're back to the standard of tax equity and using tax credits.
So I guess it's also to boost activity in the right sectors and get more development going. So how were you in the right place at the right time to then be able to say, you know what, there's an opportunity here. I'm going to start this company.
Yeah. Thanks, Nada. So in terms of timing, this made a lot of sense for me because it leverages a specialized skill set that I have. Tax equity investments is not a very common area. It's very nuanced. And so it's leveraging that expertise in a time where there's great need to monetize these tax credits. And, one issue, before I started Breakpoint Energy, I worked at Bank of America in New York, and Bank of America and JP Morgan, those two banks make up half of the tax equity in the market. And they are great institutions, and they run really good shops. But like anyone else, they have limited bandwidth. And so there's just, there aren't enough people, there aren't enough folks to put eyeballs on all the deals that are going to come about with regard to all the technologies and all the different needs of developers. So I'm fully convinced that in order for all of these tax credits to be monetized, which Credit Suisse estimates it's over $500 billion, over $500 billion before 2031 that's going to be available from the IRA. New players need to come to the table. And so I'm specifically focused on helping corporate entities to participate in this market.
Yeah. We didn't really talk about your business model, but does that make you like a buy-side advisor, or how does this work?
Yeah. So a little bit of both. So I'm calling myself Transferability broker and underwriter because I am just that. I broker the tax credits, so match buyers and sellers.
Okay.
But then something a little bit different from some other folks who have emerged in this space that I'm doing is also representing the buyer, as you just mentioned. So as your example, a pet store might come and be interested in buying tax credits, but they don't really know where to start in terms of getting one of these deals done. So I would help them to find an opportunity, and then I would actually be their deal lead to conduct due diligence and negotiate transaction documents to get the deal done. So both of those things.
Full disclosure, I have one share of Petco.
Do you really? All right.
That's why you have to talk about them.
I gotta ask.
You gotta throw them in there. Yeah.
Yeah, interesting. Okay.
So then from the buyer side, what would, I guess one incentive would be to get additional money. And is that going to come from the IRS? That, that 8 million that you spoke about before, that comes from the IRS because that's the difference.
Well, it's 8 million you don't have to pay to the IRS.
You don't have to pay to the IRS.
That's
so
right.
you actually save in your taxes.
Exactly.
So that's your incentive.
That's
for the buyer.
For corporate customers, do they do refunds like they do for normal people?
Yeah, right. So it's very interesting for individuals. So the way that the rules are written is that this framework is set up to benefit corporate entities, so companies, and it's the easiest for a publicly traded C corporation, not publicly traded. Can we remember that part?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It's the rules are set up so that C corporations are able to use the tax credits to offset ordinary income. So it's the easiest for them to use it. Other business entity types must use the tax credits to offset passive activities. So that's a little more restrictive. And, we're talking about activities like real estate or just any sort of operation where they're not involved in the day-to-day activities and spending a lot of their focus on time on it. And there are prescriptive rules as to what passive activity is, but that's a rule for these other organizations that are not C corps. And then lastly, for individuals, Jason, as you're mentioning, the rules are prohibitively restrictive, so that it's not really possible for individuals to buy these tax credits.
And you're specifically focused on clean energy tax credits. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So there are 11 types of tax credits that can be transferred under the IRA. And those include all sorts of technologies, most of them in the clean energy space, as you're saying, wind, solar, biomass, carbon capture, green hydrogen, all sorts. There's one interesting one that one interesting sort of application that is not what folks traditionally think of as clean energy, and that's combined heat and power or a cogeneration facility. Those are also subject to tax credits as well. But within the 11 types of tax credits, I'm mostly focused on two kinds, and those are called the investment tax credit and the production tax credit. And they're both tax credits that apply to projects in the wind, solar, and battery space, but they have a little bit of differences in the way that they're calculated and the risks associated with them. But I'm focused on those because that's what investors understand the most. Those are the ones that have been using tax credits the most in this space. So I'm starting with my focus there and plan to branch outward in the future.
Yeah, and I'm curious for the other types of tax credits. What are the barriers? Is it because there's technical complexity or lack of standardization? Kind of explain to us why maybe that's an undertapped resource.
Yeah, so I think it is in an undertapped area. So the government is over time releasing information to give guidance on how these different types of tax credits are calculated, the value of them and certain rules. So in the ones that I'm focusing on, those are the most well understood because they have the most information and description and sort of analysis around them. But absolutely, these other areas and the other technologies that I mentioned, there is opportunity for folks to participate in that space. But one issue, though, is that buyers will price the tax credit accordingly. So they're willing to pay the most for technologies that they understand,
Of
and
course.
they would be willing to come to the table to entertain some of these other ones, but would expect to pay a more significant discount for them.
Yeah. And I think that's why there are a lot of questions about how does this get applied, is because there's still guidance coming out. This is a very dynamic topic, even though we're kind of a year out from when some of the initial guidance came out, and will continue to evolve. So we're gonna have you back in a year to tell us what's changed.
Absolutely.
But I understand why this can define a lot for early stage companies, but it's so unknown because we're still waiting for the guidance. So I understand why you're focused where you're focused today.
So how's the startup journey been for you so far? How long have you been since you started the company, and how's it going?
Yeah, absolutely. So I launched the tax credit brokerage firm this past fall, and it's going great. I'm contacted by folks every day. One interesting sort of dynamic about the market is there are overwhelmingly more sellers of tax credits right now than buyers. And the reason for that is because the energy companies are familiar with these concepts, and as soon as the IRA came about, they said, "Hey, let's get to work. Let's start selling these things." But there's a significant learning curve for new players, not the traditional banks, to buy these. So I'm very focused on building awareness on the demand side to help balance that out. As a part of my startup journey, I tried two other things before I landed on this. So first, I was working to develop a solar farm in Texas. And after several months of talking with a landowner and engaging an engineering firm, I reached an impasse with the landowner in terms of some certain key agreements that would be needed to make that project happen. So pivoted from project development. Then I was looking to acquire a development company in a similar space, developing wind and solar projects, had investors, and several months into the due diligence process, we uncovered a fatal flaw or a very concerning fact pattern, and decided not to move forward with that. So I've shared that just as full transparency that I know that folks like to put their best foot forward, but I fully embrace and think it's great to try different ideas that you have and that you feel very confident that you should pursue, because now landing at my tax credit brokerage firm, I can't emphasize how good of a fit it is in terms of skill set and market timing. So had a little bit of a journey trying some other related activities before coming to this one.
And I think the importance of what you learned from those activities, right? To be able to do what you're doing now and doing it better is so important. And that's what we always forget. And important to remind entrepreneurs that there are going to be a lot of setbacks along the way, but it doesn't mean you stop being an entrepreneur.
Yeah. I think, in some ways it's a certain type of maturity that is required to look at something and say, look, these are the things I must have to make this business work. The spreadsheet doesn't make it work, or just the business terms. I remember when I was doing my first business out of college, and there was so much emotional angst because we were building technology. We had as a founding team, we'd put so much of our identity into the company we built. The company had a life of 9 months. We should have killed it 4 months in when the customer said no, not interested. And instead we kept trying to push through when all the data, the information, the market told us no. And I think that's hard for a lot of entrepreneurs who do things for the first time, is being realistic with themselves. You obviously are an analytical person, so you knew what was important and what you needed to make that transition. And it's part of creating a company is a marketing exercise. You have to go out and see what's real and what people want. And if it's not, move on to the next concept. You're still kind of in that creative phase, and you've landed on something that fills a real need today.
Yes,
right? And that's and I think it's hard to explain to non-entrepreneurs, but you can feel it when things kind of line up.
Absolutely, completely agree with that sentiment. And even in this situation of an opportunity that feels perfect and that is getting a lot of traction, I still experienced expectations that were different from reality in terms of when I opened my doors. Even though I've heard it before, I expected folks to come running and knocking on my door because I knew that I'm an expert in this space. But no, I had to learn about marketing and test out different avenues to create awareness and build trust. So even if an opportunity is a strong one and it's one that's going to work for you, it still doesn't happen on its own in the beginning.
So let's delve into that. So how do you build your position as a thought leader? What are the like specific activities that you've engaged in, so we can kind of educate people who listen on like what do they actually need to do to establish themselves?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've put out some posts on LinkedIn just to create summary, digestible facts about how all of this works, because it's very technical, it's very nuanced, and what is more boring in the world than tax credits? So I try to break it down in plain English and put it on LinkedIn so that folks from all sorts of different backgrounds can see that. Also, I am using Google AdWords. That's been extremely useful. Great success with that. And then this past paper, actually, I, talking about testing out different methods, this past Sunday, I ran a quarter page ad in the Houston Chronicle in the front section. And so tried that as well. But in addition to sort of traditional marketing channels, it's also attending conferences. There's a group called InfoCast that you may be familiar with that puts on all sorts of different conferences. And so attending those and helping actually developers, sellers to teach them about the benefits of transferability, because they'll be the one that picks up the phone to call me when they need to sell them. So attending a lot of in-person events has been really helpful too.
I am very curious how much running an ad costs, but maybe we don't want to reveal the price. I was with an entrepreneur last week, and he had this very professional video made about his business, and it was like $400. And I'm just amazed how cost effective it can be sometimes to create kind of advertising where maybe 10 or 15 years ago it was cost prohibitive, but the talent's there, the technology's there to make it really accessible. When you made the ad, like do you have a graphic designer in your life who helped you put it together, or how did that work?
I do not. So the Houston Chronicle has a design team. And so I just using PowerPoint, I knew the dimensions of the ad that I was going to have. And I created a draft, sent it to them. They proposed some changes, and we just went back a few times. But no, I just tried to keep it concise and straight to the point, and again, in plain English. And they ran ultimately what I drafted for it.
Very straightforward.
And so have you had any inbound or success with going out and talking to customers? Because this is corporate clients, right? It's a B2B.
Yes. Yes, I have. That process, I've referred earlier to this buyer's learning curve. And so it's been good. I have several companies that I'm working with and who I've been educating for months since I launched in the fall. And so several of these companies are ready to make their first investment, buy their first set of tax credits early this year. But that's right. Absolutely had some connections in that way that both I reached out to through mutual acquaintances, and some reached out to me as well.
Because you need to be talking to specific people within a big corporate, right? It can't just be anyone, because not everyone knows about tax credit or is interested in that, right? So it's like the part of the company that takes care of that.
You got it, Nada. Exactly right. It's typically the head tax person and the CFO that is often the most interested in this.
And is it energy companies that would be more interested in this because it's clean energy tax credit? What kind of companies do you think are within your niche?
Yeah. So that one beauty of being in Houston, I know that's a focus of the show, is just the number of energy companies that we have here, and especially the ones in the traditional energy space, fossil fuels, oil and gas, and coal. A lot of these companies, as you know, are interested in participating in the energy transition. They have committed to doing so, and they might not be out building solar farms themselves if their bread and butter is drilling wells, but everyone is in the business of making money and saving in taxes where possible. So I think that's right. I think these traditional energy companies are excellent candidates to be able to buy these tax credits, especially since the ESG offering is so beneficial to a lot of them. That's a great point.
And is your solution then based on like a technology that you're going to develop? How are you going to provide the service?
Maybe a different question is like, how does this business scale? Because I kind of understand how traditional like equity broker dealers function, where it's usually partner based and they're getting in deal flow. But this isn't necessarily. Is there a technology? Is kind of the first question, or is it more traditional?
Yeah, great question. There are other companies who have offered software solutions and platforms to help in this space. I am not doing that right now. So as I mentioned, right now I'm a team of one. I plan to hire additional brokers later on this year, but something that's important to me is to have 100% ownership of the company. Just seeing I just turned 40. Looking at my parents' generation and seeing the benefits of really having a family-owned business. That's something that really resonates with me. And even if it means having less profits than I'd otherwise get with investors or a large amount of debt, there's a level of satisfaction for me with it being my company. But with that said, it's very important for anyone who joins this team to be incentivized and feel like they're able to get anything they can. So I fully subscribe to a very generous and lucrative compensation model that's unlimited for someone who would join my team.
But I think going back a little bit, there's like an intuition you have about how this new offering, like this new product, needs to be sold. And I think as much as we like to think technology can solve everything, we're in this technology adoption cycle where you're kind of working with the early adopters, and you said the issue is education, right? Like that they are still learning how to use this. It's restricted to almost just specific verticals of industry. The customer is not ready for something that's automated yet, and it'll probably I'm gonna boldly say it'll take them a decade before they're ready to kind of take the reins themselves and do this on Schwab, right? Or whatever the corporate equivalent is. Like this is the solution that's needed today. It needs to be a little bit of handholding with the tax equity expert, and that's true with any kind of new technology or a new process, right?
Yes,
and that's kind of where we are in the cycle.
I completely agreed, and a couple comments on that. So first of all, the rules say that these tax credits can only be sold one time. So you're not going to see an online platform like Fidelity or Schwab where you're trading these tax credits multiple times. That's one point. And then also each transaction is so bespoke because a buyer is evaluating the fact pattern related to the project that is making these tax credits. So because that process is important, I don't think it's going to be automated anytime soon. I think human eyeballs are required to look at the fact patterns, and a human brain is required to consider it. With that said, I'm all about AI. I'm all about technology. I just think this particular industry requires some personalization.
We're going to go on a total tangent. Was definitely reading an article this morning about how ChatGPT is terrible at inference and deduction, and they kind of gave those 20 case studies about why this doesn't work. And as much as I'm a big fan of the language models kind of doing their magic, at a certain point, you do need the person to kind of go through and describe, as you describe it, a fact pattern. You have to kind of apply that deductive reasoning in a way where the AI is just not ready, right?
Yep, exactly right. Completely agree with that.
Yeah. Sorry, that was a bit of a tangent.
Yeah, and curious to know what it's like having moved back from New York to Houston, and how have you found the startup ecosystem to be supportive or not?
Yeah, so moving back to Houston from New York City has been great. I mentioned before the personal aspect of having extended family here, but also Houston's just a great city. I grew up in Katy, 20 miles west from the middle of the city, and Houstonians are just warm, friendly people with great energy, and I just think that there are a lot of great things about this city. I mean, even when we talk about the temperature down here, yes, summers get brutal, but this is a city where in the wintertime you're able to go out for a run and exercise. And I think that that's really important. And especially when talking about the energy transition, a lot of the folks in this town are ex-oil and gas people, and they are excited. A lot of them are excited about participating in the energy transition, and they have a really, really great skills. They all have great skill sets that apply to clean energy as well. So I think this city is positioned really well for that. In terms of a founders community, I've had some limited interactions. I did go to Greentown one time and really enjoyed myself there. But I'm aware of all the emerging companies that are happening right here. So it does give comfort that this is an ecosystem where you really have everything you need. And in the paper and a little bit more publicly available are some of the industrial companies that are here, but we also have the bankers that can finance these projects. And again, all the other professionals too, permitting, supply chain, all of those folks are absolutely needed to get these products and projects done. And that really makes Houston a special place.
You made me think, so we have a lot of private equity firms that do kind of these larger I would call them scale up, I guess, or deployment of capital projects. Do they end up like entering the conversation at all with you because of who they're investing in, or is that unrelated?
They do. That's a good question, Jason. So sometimes I'll hear from private equity companies or investment funds representing a seller because their fund might have ownership in some energy generation assets.
Yeah.
So I'll hear from them and they'll say, hey, this transferability framework sounds interesting. Can we talk about it? By the same token, there are financial institutions that are interested in participating as buyers because they've done well and have a large tax liability and are interested in buying tax credits. So yes, sort of the big players as buyers have been industrial companies, but there are financial institutions that are also acting as buyers as well. So that's a good question.
We often ask our people if there's a hidden gem in Houston that they'd like to share with us, having moved back here, something new that you've discovered, or going back to the place that you've always liked growing up here.
Yeah. So I'm a huge fan of Houston, as I described, and I know that some other guests on your show have brought up food before, and I'm absolutely going to tout that. The food here is absolutely amazing, whether you're talking Italian, seafood, Tex-Mex is what gets the most attention, but just absolutely fabulous restaurants. And it's funny, Tex-Mex is my favorite. When we lived in New York City, I was craving queso weekly, and we found one place that was started by some Texans and had them Uber Eats it, some tacos and queso to us from across the city. So it's really nice to be here and have that right here. We've got a Mexican restaurant around the corner from us in the Heights of Houston where we live. And that's a really nice area. I do want to say Houston has some neighborhoods that are walkable and that really have sort of a pedestrian feel that folks don't expect to be here. Because you look at a map of Houston and it takes hours to drive across it. But we're able to live in a community where we're able to walk to go to an exercise class, go to the grocery store, drop off our son at school. And so I do want to highlight that it is possible to make this a walking city, despite what it looks like at face value.
You got to tell us what the Mexican restaurant is next to your house.
Yeah.
That's the gem.
Yeah, for sure. So the Mexican restaurant is Good Company.
Oh, okay.
And it is, giving them a plug here, it's somewhere around 18th Street and Yale-ish, but in the Heights. And that is the one place where my wife and I are able to go out to dinner and have an adult conversation because we put a bowl of queso in front of our son and he just goes to town.
Yes, half of the good stuff in Houston is being able to manage the children effectively.
You got it exactly right.
Yeah. No, and it's in a children friendly town too. And I think that area in the Heights where you can go biking, go running, and also walk to restaurants and stuff. Like it's amazing to see how we've developed that, and hopefully we can develop it more.
Mm-hmm. But importantly, you decided not to move back to Katy.
Yes.
If it has anything to do with parents, we can move the conversation on.
Not at all. We just wanted to experience at this time in our life some of that pedestrian lifestyle that we're talking about. We may ultimately, we probably will move eventually, just to have a little more space than we have now in the Heights. Consider factors like schools. But yes, it was a decision that for at least 4 or 5 years or so, coming back from New York, we wanted to be able to experience a lot that Houston has to offer.
Mm-hmm.
Have you seen a difference in mentality in the way people think here and the way people think in New York? Like something that really stood out to you?
It feels different than it did when I left here. So I left Houston originally in 2007, and coming back here now in the 2020s, it's a completely different place. And in my opinion, for the better. I'm a big fan of a lot of the changes that have taken place down in Houston. In terms of differences from New York City, the cost of living in Houston is significantly better than it is in New York City. I'm not saying that everywhere within Houston is the best from that perspective, but it was nice to have that adjustment. And just the friendliness of people. You walk down the street, people look at you and say hi. I like that. To me, that's important. I'm a people person.
I'm still not used to that.
Are you?
Because I'm from the East Coast and I lived in Boston, and I'm like, who are all these people smiling at me and waving at me? It's weird.
Oh yeah. It's very creepy if you're not used to it.
And especially in your neighborhood, right? Because we just moved back from Norway, and we wave at our neighbors and stuff. And my kids are like, well, "Do you know them, Mom? Why are you waving at them?" And I was like, "That's what you do here."
Even to your kids, they notice that
they
it was
notice, right? Because I have to say hi to everybody here because that's what you do.
I also think in Norway, your hands are always in your pockets.
Yeah, in Norway, you don't make eye contact with people, strangers, people you don't know. So it's a big difference for them. But one thing I've also noticed about Houston, also, moving back here, and also sometimes when I go visit my friends in the East Coast, is I feel like there's that less elitism, and anyone can be an entrepreneur because we have so many entrepreneurs, but not in the sense of Silicon Valley, but everyone can start their own sort of small business, either serving the oil and gas industry or start their restaurant. And people just have that spirit, and they're not necessarily talking about, where they went to school or, things like that. Which I kind of like, which makes it a bit more friendlier, right?
Yes.
So it's not really about, your credentials and where you come from and if I'm going to be your friend. But, we are neighbors, our kids go to school together. So, we have a lot in common.
That's right. I wholeheartedly agree with that. And New York City is a fun place. If folks have an opportunity to live there for a stint of time, I encourage it. But that's right. The things that matter at the end of the day, relationships and focusing on what's important to you, I find this to be a way more natural environment for that, because some of the characteristics you just described absolutely saw everywhere in New York City.
So bringing it back to kind of the entrepreneurial ecosystem, as you've been going on this journey, are there any resources or resources you wish you had, or gaps that you've kind of identified where maybe it's like, oh, it'd be so much easier if this was just here? Yeah.
Within Houston?
Yeah, within Houston.
Not really. When you ask that, I don't. I can't think of any sort of very obvious shortfalls in the city for doing what I'm trying to do. The biggest challenge is creating that buyer awareness about this product, but that's not specific to this city. So for what I'm doing, I could see for other industries and maybe on the technological side that could be a little bit different if there's some specialized expertise that's not as common. But in this case, no, luckily I don't see a gap that's specific to this city.
So what is one thing our audience could do to support you?
So one thing that the audience could do is share my website with any organization that the audience thinks would be interested in lowering their taxes, earning a return by paying less taxes, and meeting their ESG goals. That would be very helpful. And go ahead.
No, and how can they reach you? How can they get in touch with you?
The best way to get in touch is through my website. My website is www.bpetx.com. That stands for Breakpoint Energy Texas.com.
Cool. Good. Well, thanks for being on here and explaining to us everything we need to know about taxes. We're going to have to bring you on in April of next year, because it'll be top of mind.
Tax time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for having me here today. It was wonderful to be here.